From the start of our marriage, I've had a hard time dealing with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. They've always treated me poorly, and to make things worse, they've constantly criticized me for not being able to have children. What hurt even more was when my husband, who should have been there for me, said, "My sister-in-law is young and beautiful, and unlike you, she had kids right away." I'm honestly jealous of my brother. On top of that, my mother-in-law accused me of being infertile because she claimed I was having an affair and said she had proof from a hidden camera. So I came up with a plan. I called a family gathering, pretending it was to celebrate my nephew's birthday, and suggested we all watch the supposed evidence of my affair that my mother-in-law was talking about. When we watched it, my sister-in-law Scott and my father-in-law muttered, "I knew it," in shock. My name is Emma, and I'm 36 years old. I work in the international business division of a mid-sized trading company. I live with my husband, Scott, who is the same age as me and works at a steel manufacturing company, along with my in-laws. We don't have any children yet. I met my husband at a dating event a friend invited me to. At that time, I was in my 8th year on the job, finally getting the hang of it and starting to enjoy my work, so I wasn't really thinking about marriage. But I couldn't say no to my college friend, who kept insisting, "You have to come." Honestly, I was more interested in the special menus the restaurants had prepared for the event than in finding someone. I felt a bit out of place compared to my friend, who was actively socializing, but it turned out she got close to a guy who was there with Scott. Apparently, Scott wasn't too interested in the event either, and had been dragged along just like me. We ended up hanging out together as bystanders, but since I thought it was just a one-time thing, I didn't exchange contact information with him. However, exactly 2 weeks after the event on a Sunday, I got a call from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, but after work, the calls started coming every 15 minutes. I kept wondering, who could this possibly be? I was getting frustrated and was about to block the number, but before I did, I decided to answer the call to find out who was behind it. It turned out to be Scott, the guy I had met at the dating event. He said, "Oh, good, is this Emma?" I was relieved to know who it was, but I was also confused because I knew I hadn't given Scott my number. When I asked him how he got my number, he casually replied, "I begged a friend who was with me at the event to get it for me." Apparently, my friend had hit it off with Scott's friend and decided to start dating him after the event. Scott, who hadn't gotten my contact information, found out about this and managed to get my number by asking my friend repeatedly. Although I was a bit upset that my friend had given out my number so easily and that Scott had gone to such lengths to get it, we somehow started dating. A year later, Scott proposed to me. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but I felt that I could live a calm and peaceful life with Scott, who had a gentle and endearing personality. There were no issues from my side about getting married. My parents had been living apart since I started college, but they hadn't divorced because they didn't see any real benefit in doing so. Friends and acquaintances would ask if I felt sad about it, but I had always felt distant from my family, so their separation seemed like it was bound to happen. During my college years, my parents supported me financially, so I would visit them alternately during long vacations. However, once I started working, I used my busy schedule as an excuse to just keep them updated through social media. When I told my parents about my marriage, they said they would attend the ceremony if there was one. But when I explained that we were just going to register the marriage without any special ceremony, they later sent me a generous sum of money as a wedding gift, which was more than enough for me. However, my in-laws, Rachel and Brian, weren't happy with how my parents handled the marriage. They said things like, to think they would settle their only daughter's marriage with money, how insensitive. They spoke in a bitter tone, which bothered me. But then Scott defended me by saying, "Money is definitely a sign of love. It's ridiculous for Mom, who has never worked, to say something like that. Dad should know better, considering how hard it is to earn money." Hearing him stand up for me like that made me feel truly happy that I had chosen him. But about 6 years into our marriage, things started to go downhill. The first sign was when I got promoted at work. I had worked hard in my department since I joined the company, and that year, I decided to take the promotion exam. When I passed the exam, they told me, "Emma, you mentioned in your interview that you wanted to work globally in the future, right? How about starting in the international business division to gain some experience?" I was thrilled that my hard work was recognized, and I was excited to share the news with Scott. But when I told him, he got visibly upset and snapped at me, saying, "Oh, okay. And what are you trying to say? That you've climbed the ladder and you're some big shot now?" I was shocked by Scott's reaction and wondered if I had said something wrong. I quickly apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that." But Scott responded harshly, "See? Playing the victim like that just proves you're looking down on me." Then he angrily threw his beer can into the trash, slammed the door, and left our apartment. He didn't come back for a week. He ignored my texts and calls, and when I called his office, they told me he was out, but at least I knew he was safe. I thought about waiting for him outside his office, but I didn't want to embarrass him. So I decided to go to my in-laws' house to talk to them about what was happening. I knew they would probably blame me, but I didn't know what else to do. Even though I showed up unexpectedly, they let me in without any trouble. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I was shocked by Scott's angry outburst. He yelled, "What do you want now? Have you come all this way to mock me some more?" I quickly said that wasn't my intention and that I would apologize if I had caused any misunderstanding. But Scott didn't want to hear it, and my in-laws started blaming me too. They said things like, "Just because you both work doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. Don't you know that's not how a wife should behave?" This is exactly why we were against this marriage from the start. Rachel, my mother-in-law, was just as loud as Scott, cursing at me. From there, it turned into an endless lecture about how I had hurt their son's ego. No matter what I said, they blamed me for everything. Finally, they told me, "Scott doesn't want to go back to the apartment you two shared. If you don't want a divorce, then move out of that apartment and come live here with us. We'll teach you how to be a proper wife." Looking back, I wonder why I didn't just agree to a divorce right then and there. But at that time, I still had feelings for Scott. Having grown up watching my parents stay married in name only, I think I was confused and didn't really understand what marriage should be. After I followed my mother-in-law's suggestion and moved out of the apartment to live with my in-laws, they were extremely pleased, and it didn't take long for me to understand why. It turned out that Scott's older brother, Charles, who was 5 years older, had been living with them but moved out about 4 months before my promotion. He had found a girlfriend and wanted to live on his own. Rachel, who had always adored Charles because he graduated from a more prestigious university than Scott, was shocked and deeply upset by his sudden departure. But the problem wasn't just emotional. Charles's leaving also meant the loss of his financial contributions to the household, which was a big issue. My in-laws are very vain and love to show off. They often host gatherings for relatives, serving expensive food and drinks. Charles's financial support had been their lifeline since my father-in-law's post-retirement job didn't pay enough to cover their lavish lifestyle. They convinced Scott, who had come home to vent, to move in with them, and that's how we ended up living together. Scott seemed to enjoy the sudden attention after always feeling overshadowed by his accomplished brother. When I realized this, it felt like I was finally seeing things clearly, but more problems were on the way. Soon after, Charles married his girlfriend, Nancy, who turned out to be quite a handful. Nancy was 4 years younger than Charles and 3 years younger than Scott and me. She appeared fragile and delicate, the kind of person who triggers protective instincts in men. This was especially true for both Brian and Scott, who became visibly restless whenever Nancy visited and acted like they were her followers. Rachel, not amused by this, began criticizing me, saying, "Scott is smitten with his brother's wife because you lack charm. If you just had a child, my husband would settle down as a grandfather." She even suggested I quit my job to focus on getting pregnant. However, due to my in-laws' extravagant spending, the household expenses were skyrocketing, and Scott's salary alone couldn't cover them. Even when I showed them a report from a household budgeting software to explain the situation, they dismissed it, saying, "That's just because you're bad at managing money, always full of excuses." Then Nancy became pregnant. Rachel, who had previously disliked Nancy, suddenly became obsessed with her first grandchild, doting on her grandson, Andrew, immensely. She eagerly welcomed Nancy's visits, which she had avoided before, and even started saying things like, "Oh, how wonderful it would be to live under the same roof as such a lovely grandchild." Scott then started making sarcastic remarks to me, saying things like, "Exactly, Nancy is young and beautiful, and unlike you, she gave birth to a child right away." "I'm really jealous of my brother," Brian chimed in. "That's right. Maybe we should just kick out the daughter-in-law who can't have children and let Charles's family move in instead," he said without thinking. By then, even I started to consider that maybe leaving Scott and this house might be the best option since we didn't have children. Then, as if on cue, Nancy became pregnant with her second child. Rachel's obsession with her grandchildren grew stronger, and she started treating me even worse. She came up with a ridiculous theory and said, "The reason you can't have children must be because you're having an affair. You're just worried you won't know if the child is Scott's or your lover's." I was shocked by her words and decided to ignore her. But one evening, I noticed Rachel smirking at me. Confused, I asked what was going on, and she said, "You are indeed having an affair, just as I suspected." When I questioned Brian and Scott about it, Rachel proudly declared, "I've got proof of her affair on a hidden camera. I hired a professional, so it's foolproof," and then burst out laughing with joy. Hearing this, Brian and Scott were momentarily shocked, but then, influenced by Rachel's confidence, they said, "If that's true, then it's grounds for divorce." At that point, I calmly said, "Understood." Then I will take this opportunity at Andrew's birthday celebration next week, which we've already planned, to explain the situation to all the relatives who will be there. The birthday celebration for Andrew, organized by Rachel, who loved to show off, turned out to be a grand event with a banquet hall in a hotel reserved just for us. The invited relatives seemed somewhat tired of Rachel's boasting but still enjoyed the food and drinks. As the party was winding down, I took the microphone to speak. Everyone turned their attention to me, wondering what was happening. I began, "I apologize for interrupting your conversations, but I have a brief announcement to make to all of you gathered here today." The crowd started murmuring in confusion, while my in-laws and Scott, assuming I was about to confess and discuss divorce, smirked just like before. Charles's family, the guests of honor today, were also present. On my signal to the staff, a screen was lowered behind me, the projector was set up, and the lights dimmed. Everyone's attention turned to the screen as the video began to play. The video started with footage of a shady hotel district, and as the entrance of one particular hotel came into focus, Scott, Brian, and Nancy's faces turned pale, just as I expected. However, Rachel, unaware of what was about to happen, looked around curiously, completely oblivious to the growing tension among the two of them. Then, a clear shot captured by the camera made the entire room gasp in surprise, and for good reason. The screen unmistakably showed Nancy and Brian hugging as they left the hotel. The room fell silent as the video continued, showing them sharing lingering, passionate hugs before catching a taxi. The scene shifted to the same hotel entrance, but this time it wasn't Brian who emerged holding hands with Nancy, it was Scott. Scott, Brian, and Nancy were all frozen in place, while some of the relatives murmured, "I knew it." The room erupted into whispers again. At that moment, I paused the video, turned the lights back on, and spoke into the microphone. "My announcement to all of you is exactly what you've just seen. My husband Scott and father-in-law Brian have been having affairs with Nancy, Charles's wife. The evidence was meticulously recorded by the investigation company hired by Rachel." I held up a thick file of documents, which caused more gasps from the crowd. As the noise died down, I revealed that the investigation company had actually been hired by Rachel, not to uncover Brian, Scott, and Nancy's infidelity, but to find proof of my supposed affair, so they could kick me out. Scott must have filled her head with all sorts of nonsense, making her believe such absurd things, I said, causing the relatives to look at Scott and Rachel in disbelief. Rachel had declared victory without even checking the contents when the investigation company reported they had caught evidence on camera. Unfortunately, I have no idea about the affair Rachel accused me of, I continued, projecting a photograph onto the screen. It was a snapshot taken at the maternity hospital when Andrew was born. The photo showed my sister-in-law holding Andrew in the center, with Charles smiling beside her, and Scott and I, who had come to celebrate, in the background. Since Rachel has always disliked me, she probably didn't have a single clear photo of me. So she sent this snapshot to the investigation company, asking them to find evidence of the daughter-in-law's infidelity. As I explained, I briefly glanced at Rachel, who looked shocked, as if I had hit the nail on the head. The investigation company, hired by Rachel, had made a mistake. They thought Nancy, who was holding the child in the photo, was the daughter-in-law they were supposed to be investigating. When they started their work, they unexpectedly captured Brian and Scott repeatedly visiting the hotel with Nancy. Believing Charles to be the husband under investigation, they reported to Rachel that they had caught evidence on camera. Rachel, thinking this was proof of my alleged affair, believed she had finally found what she was looking for. When I was first confronted with the so-called evidence, I was surprised, but then something clicked. I remembered the name of the investigation company from a credit card statement that Rachel had used. Rachel, who often spent too much, had made me get her a family card to use for her purchases, just in case her own credit card limit wasn't enough. Troubled by her making large purchases without consulting me, I had set up the card statement to be viewable in an app, so I could check the charges each month. The next day, I took half a day off work and went to the investigation company to explain the situation. I then commissioned a new investigation myself. Realizing their mistake, the company eagerly accepted the task to make things right, and they quickly provided the results, which led to the evidence I presented today. As the screen was removed and the lights brightened, Nancy, Brian, and Scott all looked pale. I approached the great-aunt and uncle, whom my in-laws greatly respected, and said, "I apologize for the inconvenience, but I prefer not to expose the children to what's about to be discussed. Could someone please take them to another room?" The great-aunt and uncle immediately approached Nancy, took Andrew, and handed him over to their own children. The other children were also led to another room by several women, leaving behind furious relatives, a stunned Rachel, and a bewildered Charles. Only Nancy, Brian, and Scott remained, shrinking under the stern glares of the relatives. Then, Rachel, who had been trembling, suddenly leaped towards Nancy, shouting, "What have you done? Betraying me and Charles with Brian and Scott." She lunged at Nancy, but several relatives rushed to stop her. Nancy was already petrified, and Brian and Scott were similarly frightened. Finally, I decided to deliver the last blow. Given the circumstances, I will be divorcing Scott. I apologize for any inconvenience caused to everyone here. According to the investigation company, the improper relations between these two have been ongoing and not just recent. Reconciliation is impossible. I made the announcement, then pretended to stumble as I added, "After reviewing the investigation results, I've been tormented by the thought that Andrew, and even the child Nancy, is currently carrying might belong to Brian or Scott." The remaining women in the room rushed over, rubbing my back and taking my arms to support me, saying to the two of them, "You are all shameless and disgusting." "Poor you," they started cursing. The men looked on with disdain, surrounding the two with cold stares. Brian and Scott could do nothing but stand there, silenced by the disapproval, while Rachel continued ranting and Nancy sobbed. The fallout from my revelation that day spread quickly. When Charles found out that his wife had been cheating on him with both his brother and father, he was in shock for a while. But as he started to regain his senses, he began to seriously doubt Nancy's claims that Andrew and the baby she was carrying were his. Nancy pleaded desperately, saying, "That's just a lie. Both Andrew and the baby are undeniably your children." However, once suspicion takes root, it doesn't disappear easily. Taking advantage of a moment when Nancy was off guard, Charles used a paternity test kit he had ordered to check their father-child relationship, and the results came back positive. Even when confronted with the results, Nancy stubbornly refused to admit to cheating, frustrating Charles to the point where he contacted her parents. Caught completely off guard, Nancy's parents couldn't believe the story Charles told them, so they came to my office demanding an explanation. Though I found it bothersome, I knew I had to deal with this eventually, so I took the next day off and went with Nancy's parents and the couple to the law firm I had hired. When the lawyer, Richard, showed them the related documents and the infamous video, Nancy's parents were speechless. Seeing this, Charles triumphantly declared, "See? I told you she betrayed me, cheating with both my brother and father. It's clear neither Andrew nor the baby she's carrying are mine. But Richard interrupted him sharply, saying, "Would you mind discussing that among yourselves? You're here not to discuss who the father of the children is, but to address the issue of child support." It was obvious that Richard wasn't taking sides, but what shocked me more was Nancy and her parents' reaction. Nancy retorted mockingly, "It's your fault. Scott cheated on you because you were always working and not being attractive enough, right? It's your own doing." I calmly replied, "Is that so? Then we'll have to let a third party decide." "Who's right?" "Maybe a judge will decide." When I mentioned a trial, Nancy's parents turned pale, and it was no surprise. Both of them were teachers at a prestigious girls' school in the area, and the idea of their daughter, who was supposed to represent the ideal of a good wife and mother, being involved in such a scandal with her brother-in-law and father-in-law would ruin their reputation. As soon as they heard the word trial, Nancy's parents immediately begged, "We sincerely apologize." But to me, at this stage, an apology from anyone didn't matter. I glanced at Richard and stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Later, Richard informed me that after I left, Charles, Nancy, and her parents caused a huge uproar, but they finally left after Richard threatened to call the police. Not long after, perhaps as a way to keep things quiet, Nancy's parents transferred a large sum of money through Richard. Given how things turned out, what happened to Charles and Nancy didn't concern me much, but around the same time, I found out about the fate of my in-laws through Scott, who had also demanded a division of assets. According to Scott, Charles filed for divorce and refused to pay child support for Andrew or the unborn child unless a DNA test proved he was the father. He even declared he would file for denial of paternity as soon as the child was born. Fearing the worst, Nancy's parents, against her wishes, forced her to undergo prenatal testing. It turned out that the father of the unborn child wasn't Charles, but shockingly, it was Scott. Even more, it was revealed that Andrew's father was Brian, making the situation beyond repair. When Rachel, who had doted on Andrew, found out he was actually her husband's child, she had a mental breakdown. She aged rapidly and is now almost bedridden, with Brian taking care of her around the clock. Brian told his father-in-law, "I won't look after you in your old age, get Scott to do it." Unfortunately, most of Brian's retirement funds had been spent on luxury brands and jewelry for Nancy in an attempt to win her favor, leaving almost nothing behind. As a result, with their inheritance depleted, Brian and Rachel, now abandoned by Charles, turned to Scott in desperation. But Scott, already burdened with my asset division claims, was reportedly being pressured by Nancy, who had been divorced by Charles. She was demanding that Scott marry her, insisting, "Now that it's come to this, you're going to take responsibility for both the unborn child and me. I'm sorry for everything that's happened. I apologize, so please give me another chance." "I love you, Emma." Scott begged for forgiveness, but it was clear he wasn't seeking my love, he just wanted my financial support and someone to care for his parents for free. Since I had no lingering feelings for Scott, I instructed Richard to convey my final decision and blocked all contact with him except through one social media platform. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, despite some disputes. The asset division was paid in full in 2 installments. According to Richard, Nancy continued living with my in-laws, pretending to be Scott's wife, even though she wasn't officially registered as part of the family. However, once word spread among visiting relatives, the whole neighborhood began whispering about this shameless family, which drove Nancy to become a recluse. She neither helped with Rachel's care nor took care of Andrew and the newborn, leading the kindergarten to report Andrew's neglected appearance to child services. In the end, Nancy's parents took in the 2 children but disowned her, saying, "You are no longer our daughter, and we are no longer your parents. Never show your face to us again." With nowhere else to turn, Nancy relied entirely on Scott, just like my in-laws. Scott's income alone now had to support 4 adults, including his mother, who needed nursing care. A colleague of Scott's, who works at the same company, mentioned that a relative at an affiliated company exaggerated the story, making Scott the target of rumors as bad as those on gossip websites. Despite the difficult situation, Scott continues to work, unable to quit because of financial needs, enduring the discomfort. For some reason, Charles seemed to regard us as fellow victims, but the fact remains that he looked down on me, along with Nancy and my in-laws, for being a woman unable to bear children. Naturally, I ignored him completely at work, but as rumors spread within our company, he couldn't handle the whispers and volunteered to transfer to a subsidiary in a regional area. After everything was settled on my end, I was approached about a transfer to an overseas branch. Although I had expressed a desire to work abroad during my job interview, the sudden offer caught me off guard. However, my bosses encouraged me, acknowledging the career I had built and the language skills I had continued to learn in my spare time. Feeling fed up with the rumors, much like Charles, albeit for different reasons, I decided to take the opportunity. I decided to take a bold step and accept the overseas assignment. When Scott somehow heard the news, he sent a series of cliché romantic messages, pleading for reconciliation on the only social media account I hadn't blocked him on. But since I planned to cancel my phone service when I leave the country, I chose to ignore them. Despite everything that happened, cutting ties with that in-law family feels like a stroke of luck. With this in mind, I feel ready to face any challenges that may come my way. It might seem a bit opportunistic, but that's honestly how I feel. Maybe I've been too hard on myself all this time. From now on, I plan to stay positive and give my best effort in everything I do.
I smoothed out the wrinkles on my silk evening gown and took a deep breath. Tonight's celebration dinner at the country club was supposed to be a happy occasion, marking my husband Robert's retirement after decades of leading Reyna Enterprises. Little did I know it would become the stage for one of the most shocking betrayals of my life. As we clinked champagne glasses with the board members and their spouses, Robert cleared his throat. "I have an announcement to make," he declared, his eyes flickering towards a young woman at the other end of the table. My heart sank as I recognized Helen Hadsell, one of the junior marketing executives. The way Robert looked at her made my stomach churn. "Amy and I have decided to get divorced," Robert continued, his voice steady. "I've fallen in love with someone else, and we plan to marry soon." A hush fell over the table as gasps and murmurs erupted. I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You coward," I spat at Robert, my voice trembling with fury. "How dare you blindside me like this?" "I'm sorry, Amy," he said, not sounding sorry at all, "but I've made up my mind. Helen understands me in a way you never could." Helen shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed. I shot her a withering glare, wondering how this naive girl could be so foolish. As the dinner descended into chaos, I excused myself, desperate for air. Out on the terrace, I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breathing. Anger and humiliation washed over me in waves. Robert had been my whole world for over 31 years. We'd built Reyna Enterprises together from the ground up, sacrificing countless nights and weekends. And this was how he repaid me by casting me aside for someone half my age. I wiped away a tear, my jaw set with determination. If Robert thought I would go down without a fight, he was wrong. Game on, I thought. The gloves were coming off. That night, I couldn't sleep, replaying Robert's betrayal over and over in my mind. How could the man I'd loved and supported for decades do this to me and our family? As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I knew I couldn't stay in misery any longer. If Robert wanted a fight, then a fight he would get. I marched into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were puffy from crying, but my resolve had never been stronger. I was Amy Reyna, and I would not be the victim here. First order of business was hiring a tough divorce attorney. I had my secretary set up meetings with the city's most ruthless lawyers. Within hours, I was sitting across from Julie Bowen, a fierce litigator known for taking down cheating husbands. "I want to bleed him dry," I said bluntly as Julie looked through my financial documents. She raised an eyebrow. "Even with your substantial assets, a nasty divorce could deplete your net worth considerably." "Money is no object," I said through gritted teeth. That lying snake is going to pay for what he did to me and my family's legacy. A sly smile spread across Julie's face. Then let's make sure we take him for everything he's worth. Over the next few weeks, I followed Julie's advice to the letter, using every resource at my disposal. Quiet instructions were given to the Reyna Enterprises accounting department for a full forensic audit under the guise of routine checks. Every bank statement, every money transfer, I wanted them examined closely. Julie also coached me on planting seeds of doubt among the board members, suggesting personal concerns over Robert's ability to properly lead the company given his emotional state. A few whispered comments here, a worried look there, and suddenly the company I had helped build was questioning my husband's leadership. All the while, Robert walked around in a love-struck daze, oblivious to the trap I was setting around him. He thought I would simply walk away. I would be content with whatever crumbs he decided to toss my way in the divorce. The poor fool had no idea what kind of trouble was coming. The forensic audit quickly revealed a web of shady dealings connected to Robert's desperation to impress his young mistress. Inflated expense reports, kickbacks from vendors, even outright theft. He had put Reyna Enterprises' financial health at risk to fund his lavish courtship of Helen. I pored over the damning documents late into the night, my anger growing with each uncovered wrongdoing. This was the true depth of Robert's deceit. He was willing to sacrifice our life's work, the company we built from nothing, all for a fling with a girl young enough to be his daughter. The next morning, I hand-delivered the audit findings to the board, making sure to highlight the most serious violations with pointed commentary. Clearly, Robert's judgment has been clouded by his personal indiscretions. I stated, careful to keep my tone measured despite the storm raging inside me. I shudder to think how much further this rot might have spread if left unchecked. One by one, I watched the concern etch itself onto the board members' faces. Even Robert's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the evidence of his mismanagement and potential criminal activity. Robert, for his part, seemed stunned by my revelations. The fool actually had the audacity to pull me aside and try to plead ignorance. "Amy, you have to believe me. I never meant for things to go this far," he blubbered. "I've made some mistakes, sure, but it was all for love." I recoiled from his clammy grasp, disgust written plainly across my face. "For love? You jeopardized everything we built together for some cheap fling. I don't even recognize you anymore." As if summoned, Helen appeared in the doorway, her heavy makeup unable to hide her fragility. Robert's eyes immediately locked onto her, his entire stance changing as if their bond transcended the tawdry reality. "Don't worry, my dear," he cooed. "Once the old ball and chain is out of the way, nothing will keep us apart." The naked cruelty in his voice awakened an icy clarity in me. Forget taking him for everything he was worth. This man deserved to lose it all. I crossed the room and stood squarely between Robert and his prize. "Let me make one thing clear to both of you. I am not going anywhere. This company was my life long before you came along, Helen, and I'll be damned if I let you ruin it. I won't let either of you destroy it with your recklessness." Helen opened her mouth, her panicked eyes flicking to Robert for support. But I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "As for you," I turned my withering gaze onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. "I did not survive decades of your insufferable ego just to be discarded in your twilight years. You want to play in the mud with this girl, be my guest, but I guarantee the only thing waiting for you is regret." Turning on my heel, I left them gaping in my wake, already planning my next move. Let them have their fantasy, for now their world was about to come crashing down. With the audit findings exposing Robert's misdeeds, I knew I had all the leverage for ensuring a favorable divorce settlement. Still, I intended to twist the knife further before going in for the kill. I requested an emergency meeting with Robert, putting on my best act of contriteness when he arrived. "I've had some time to reflect on things," I began, wringing my hands for effect. and I realize now how terribly I've behaved. Robert's eyes widened in surprise, and I fought back the urge to sneer at his gullibility. Really? You're finally coming around. I was just so hurt and angry. I continued, letting my voice quaver with manufactured regret. But I see now that I can't force you to love me. You found happiness with Helen, and it's not my place to stand in the way of true love. The smug satisfaction oozing from his expression was almost too much to bear. Well, I'm glad you've come to your senses. This has been difficult enough without your vindictiveness making things worse. I reached across the table and grasped his hand, putting on my best pleading expression. I only want what's best for you, Robert, which is why you have to end this affair immediately. His brow furrowed in confusion. What? Why would I do that? Leaning in, I lowered my voice conspiratorially. Because I'm afraid Helen has been using you this whole time, taking advantage of your generous nature for her own gain. Robert opened his mouth to protest, but I barreled on with my carefully constructed story. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've discovered evidence that she's been having other affairs. Multiple affairs, Robert. She's been bleeding you dry to fund her indiscretions behind your back. His face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, hurt, disbelief. No, Helen would never. We love each other. Putting on my most sorrowful expression, I gave his hand a pat. I'm so sorry, but it's true. The bank records, the money transfers, it's all there in black and white. She's been making a fool of you. Robert's shoulders slumped in defeat for just an instant. I felt a pang of something pity, perhaps, but it quickly passed as I remembered all the pain he had caused me. If it's any consolation, this newfound wisdom has made me realize how deeply I've misjudged you over the years. I lied. Why, if I had a partner who showed half the care and dedication you've displayed, I would consider myself the luckiest woman alive. That seemed to lift Robert's spirits a bit, and he mumbled a thank you. Men were so easy to manipulate when you knew how to handle their fragile egos. As he walked out, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Between the financial void awaiting him and the carefully planted seeds of doubt about Helen's loyalty, Robert's world was crumbling. Just a few more pushes, and his whole pathetic facade would collapse. With Robert reeling from my revelations about Helen's supposed cheating, it was time for the final blow. I called an emergency board meeting, putting on my most serious face as the members arrived. I'm afraid I have some deeply troubling news regarding Robert's conduct as CEO. I began once everyone was seated. It pains me to have to do this, but the evidence leaves me no choice. I nodded to my assistant, who handed out the audit findings. The room was filled with gasps and murmurs as the board members read about the extent of the embezzlement and misappropriation. As you can see, Robert has been systematically looting the company's funds to support an unacceptable personal relationship. I declared, letting the accusation hang in the air. His judgment has been hopelessly compromised to a degree that constitutes gross neglect of his duties. Johnny Depp, a senior board member known for his strong ethics, set down the report with a look of profound disappointment. I had my suspicions given the rumors, but I never imagined the depths of Robert's betrayal. This is a gut punch. Believe me, Johnny, I understand your pain all too well, I replied, putting on my most mournful expression. Which is why, as difficult as it is, I feel we have no choice but to relieve Robert of his duties effective immediately. A chorus of solemn nods rippled through the room. Even those usually loyal to Robert couldn't ignore his huge mistakes. Gritting my teeth, I forced out my next words. It truly breaks my heart to say this, but Robert's personal actions appeared to have sent him into an emotional tailspin, calling into question his ability to lead this company. For the good of Reina Enterprises and our employees, we must act now. I recommend an indefinite leave of absence on medical grounds while he seeks treatment. The board members' reactions told me they had taken the bait. by presenting Robert's departure as a compassionate intervention rather than a straight termination. I had given them all plausible deniability, allowing them to avoid feeling complicit in his downfall. As the meeting adjourned with the board's full endorsement, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The forensic audit, the sowing of doubts, and now this final move. A part of me felt a flicker of sadness at how far my beloved husband had fallen, but he had chosen to throw away the life we built together through his arrogance and weakness. I merely ensured he suffered the full consequences. My reflection was interrupted by the ping of a new email from Julie, my attorney. Pulling up the message, I scanned her concise update and felt a rush of vicious satisfaction. Transfer of assets proceeding as planned. The financial guillotine is primed. Just say the word. I typed a simple reply. Do it. Let the delicious ruination begin. The dominoes began falling into place with ruthless precision. Within days of being forced into a leave of absence, Robert found himself systematically frozen out of Reyna Enterprises operations. Emails went unanswered, meetings were rescheduled, and he was essentially a ghost at the company he once ruled over. I could only imagine the sinking feeling in his gut as the power he had taken for granted for decades slipped through his fingers. Still, I knew the worst was yet to come for the arrogant fool. Miss Reyna, you have a visitor. My assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. Helen Hadsell is asking to see you. A cruel smile tugged at my lips as I buzzed her in. The girl's arrival was right on schedule. Helen entered looking every bit the rabbit caught in the headlights. Though she tried valiantly to maintain her polished composure, I could see the cracks beneath the surface. What can I do for you, dear? I asked in my most saccharine tone as she took a seat. I trust this isn't about your extracurricular activities with Robert. I would simply hate for word of that unpleasantness to spread further. Her eyes went wide with panic. What are you talking about? Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. I waved a perfectly manicured hand in fake nonchalance. Just that it would be an awful shame if those private investigator reports detailing your numerous other affairs ended up going public. Can you imagine the scandal? Helen paled, and I fought back the urge to laugh at her obvious distress. The phony dossier had worked perfectly. The fake reports I had made were truly works of art. But that's not true, she sputtered. Robert and I, we love each other. It's just us. If you say so, dear, I replied coolly. Though if I were you, I might be more concerned with his mounting legal troubles and the likelihood of financial ruin. That caught her attention as I had intended. Leaning forward, I laid it all out for her in brutal clarity. The fraud charges looming over Robert, the asset freezes, and the inevitable collapse of his net worth once the divorce was finalized. Do you honestly think a man facing prison time and bankruptcy will have any qualms about leaving you high and dry? I asked with mock sympathy. Or that you'll still hold any appeal to him once the thrill of your tawdry affair fades? Helen's face crumpled as the truth sank in. She was nothing more than a disposable plaything to Robert, shiny arm candy to be cast aside when she was no longer convenient. You're lying, she whispered, but it was clear she didn't believe her own words. Smiling thinly, I pushed the killing blow. If I were you, I'd get out while you still can. Cut your losses and find yourself a new mark to leech off. There are plenty of rich, desperate fools out there to exploit. A single tear rolled down Helen's cheek as she stared at me stunned. I gave her a few moments to absorb the reality crashing down around her before delivering the final twist of the knife. Oh, and one more thing. Before you go running back to that pathetic man you've been with, I added with sugary venom, I'd strongly advise emptying out any of Robert's personal accounts or assets you have access to. You'll need whatever you can get to restart your entrepreneurial activities. For just an instant, Helen's mask slipped, and I saw the ruthless mercenary underneath. That was all the confirmation I needed that my carefully planted mole had succeeded in guiding her toward the path of maximum damage. Nodding to herself, Helen stood and wiped away the crocodile tears before squaring her shoulders in false bravado. "You're going to regret this," she spat out in a trembling voice, utterly devoid of conviction. I simply laughed as she turned on her heel and stormed out. The delusional girl had no idea how correct she was, but not for the reasons she thought. Once this was all over, the only regret would be Robert's. The only regret I had was not destroying them sooner. The end game was finally upon us. Within weeks of Helen's hasty exit, the other shoe dropped with a thud that shook Robert to his core. I took great pleasure in being there as the investigator from our corporate security team laid out the damning evidence. Bank statements, wire transfers, photos, an entire dossier showing how Helen had systematically looted over 7 figures from Robert's personal accounts and investments. She couldn't have, Robert stammered, his face pale with disbelief. We were going to start a life together. The investigator simply shrugged, his expression neutral. "I'm afraid the money trail doesn't lie, Mr. Reyna. This appears to have been a long-running scheme to bleed you dry." Robert's eyes found mine, pleading for help. "Amy, you have to believe me. I never thought she was capable of something like this." I crossed my arms and looked at him with disdain. "Really, Robert? Because it seems to me that poor judgment and self-delusion have become something of a pattern for you lately." His shoulders sagged under the weight of his situation. It would have been almost pitiable if he weren't such a despicable creature. But I don't understand why. Why would she do this to me after everything I sacrificed? He choked out. I allowed myself a feral smile. "Isn't it obvious? You were nothing more than a means to an end, a vain, gullible fool ripe for the fleecing by someone younger and prettier who knew just which strings to pull." Robert opened his mouth to defend Helen, but I silenced him with a raised hand. "Save your breath and what little dignity you have left. This is just the beginning. The avalanche is coming, and you're going to lose everything." Over the next several days, the full scope of Robert's downfall became clear. Financial penalties and legal fees piled up, draining his assets. Forensic auditors found more dubious transactions and potential tax avoidance schemes, bringing the wrath of the IRS. Meanwhile, the revelations of corporate misconduct I had carefully stowed stripped Robert of every remaining board seat and title. He went from leading a billion-dollar empire to being a shunned pariah in a month, his legacy crumbling to dust. The final blow, however, came from an unexpected direction. The gossip columns and society pages that once praised his storybook marriage to me now turned against him. With the collapse of his non-disclosure agreement as part of the divorce proceedings, the media had a field day exposing his scandalous downfall. I carefully fed tantalizing bits about his affair and wild spending to key media contacts. Soon, stories of poor, used Robert and his gold-digging mistress were splashed across the tabloids in juicy detail. The scandal was too irresistible to ignore, no matter how much money was spent trying to cover it up. In one final insult, Robert's beloved country club terminated his membership in a cloud of humiliation. The old guard closed ranks around him, making him a cautionary tale, whispered about over drinks. When Robert inevitably crawled back to me, begging for a chance to restore some fragment of his former life, I denied him with cold finality. "This is the bed you made for yourself, Robert," I said, unmoved by his pleas. "I suggest you learn to sleep in it." As he slumped away, broken and discarded, I felt a new sensation blossom within me, not quite happiness, but a sense of resolution. This chapter of betrayal and trauma was finally closed, allowing me to focus on the future. The battles had been harsh but necessary to ensure my complete independence. Never again would I allow anyone to compromise the destiny I had fought so hard for. I was Amy Reyna, newly in control of my own fate, and the world had better be ready for my brand of leadership. As the dust settled from the battlefield of my divorce, I wasted no time in firmly establishing my authority over Reina Enterprises. The board meetings that had once been mere formalities were now arenas where I wielded my hard-earned power. Profitability is down over 14% compared to last quarter's projections, I stated firmly, staring down the assembled executives. I want to know why, and I want solutions on my desk within 50 hours. There was a momentary silence as the senior leadership team avoided eye contact, each hoping someone else would speak first. Finally, Daniel, the CFO who had been Robert's loyal supporter for years, cleared his throat. The shortfalls can likely be attributed to the recent transition and its disruptions. He began carefully, not to mention the lingering PR headaches from, My eyes narrowed dangerously. You mean the scandal my husband created with his reckless behavior? The one that jeopardized this entire company's future? Daniel visibly shrank back, his face flushing. Well, I didn't mean to imply. Save it, I cut him off, leaving no room for excuses. I cut him off with a withering glare. I don't want to hear any more excuses about things beyond our control. We make our own destiny here, and anyone unable to adapt to my leadership should explore other opportunities. The room went silent, the temperature seeming to drop as the executives realized the new power dynamics. This was no longer the Reina Enterprises of old, where decisions were debated endlessly behind closed doors. There would be no more nods to consensus or democratic hand-wringing. My decisions would be final. Mrs. Reina, Melissa, the head of operations, ventured after clearing her throat. If I may be so bold, your decisive vision is a marked change from how we've traditionally operated. I think I speak for everyone when I say an adjustment period will be required before we can realign strategy. A few cautious nods rippled through the table, though most seemed to sense the defiance in Melissa's words. My jaw clenched hard enough to crack walnuts. Slowly rising to my feet, I fixed Melissa with a look that could blister paint. Let me make one thing clear for you and your colleagues, I said, my voice like razors scraping steel. I did not survive decades of being gaslit and undermined by that spineless husband of mine, only to face further diminishment from his lackeys. Melissa shrank back in her seat, all bravado evaporating as I walked around the table toward her. I could sense the others watching with a mix of disbelief and morbid fascination. None dared to intervene as the new order asserted itself. This company's old ways are over, I stated, leaning in until Melissa was forced to maintain eye contact. Either adjust to my leadership and start pulling your weight, or I'll find those better suited to my vision. Am I making myself clear? She nodded almost imperceptibly, seeming to have momentarily forgotten how to speak. Straightening up, I turned my gaze to encompass the entire room. I did not fight my way through the depths of hell just to be undermined again. Reina Enterprises answers to me now, and me alone. If that reality is too difficult for any of you to accept, I'd be more than happy to expedite your transition into unemployment. The silence that followed spoke volumes. The machine had a new master, and woe to anyone foolish enough to forget that. As the meeting disbanded, the message was clear: a new era had begun. I allowed myself a tight, predatory smile. This was just the beginning, the first step in reshaping this company in my image. Robert's lack of strength and resolve in his final years, spent chasing youthful indulgences, had led us here. Perhaps if he had shown even a fraction of my determination, this harsh transition could have been avoided. But his failures became my greatest advantage, the forge where my fierce independence was created. I emerged strong, unbreakable, and finally in complete control of my destiny. As I stood in the boardroom, the echoes of my words still hanging in the air, I knew I had just taken the first of many steps to secure my position. Robert's downfall was more than a personal victory. It was a lesson in the ruthlessness required to survive and thrive in a world that had often tried to undermine me. For years, I had been the supportive wife, the silent partner, the one who held everything together while Robert frittered away our success. But those days were over. My transformation was not sudden but forged through countless battles and betrayals. Each lie, each act of deceit had hardened me, shaping me into the formidable leader I had become. Robert's reckless pursuit of pleasure and his subsequent downfall had provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate my resolve. His weakness was the crucible that had tested and strengthened me, and now I stood unchallenged, ready to lead Reina Enterprises into a new era. From this day forward, I would ensure that my name, Amy Reina, was synonymous with strength, perseverance, and unrelenting ambition. I had not fought my way through betrayal and heartache to let anyone or anything stand in my way now. Every decision I made would reflect my vision and my commitment to transforming this company into a powerhouse. There would be no more room for complacency or weakness. Those who could not keep up would be left behind. In the weeks that followed, I implemented changes that shook the very foundations of Reina Enterprises. The old guard, loyal to Robert's way of doing things, quickly realized that their time was over. I demanded excellence and efficiency, rewarding those who adapted and excelling, while showing no mercy to those who resisted. The transition was not without its challenges, but I met each one head-on, never wavering in my determination. I reached out to new partners, forged new alliances, and introduced innovative strategies that revitalized the company's operations. Every move was calculated, every step deliberates, as I worked to erase the shadow of Robert's mismanagement and establish a legacy of my own. The media, once fixated on the scandal of my marriage's collapse, began to shift their focus to the remarkable turnaround happening at Reina Enterprises. Headlines that once spoke of betrayal and deceit now highlighted my strategic brilliance and unyielding leadership. In the end, Robert's downfall was more than just a personal victory. It was a testament to my strength and vision. It proved that I was more than capable of not only surviving but thriving in the face of adversity. I had taken control of my destiny, and there was no turning back. The world would soon understand that Amy Reina was a force to be reckoned with, a leader who had emerged from the flames of betrayal stronger and more determined than ever. I stood tall, knowing that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, but I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. With every decision, every action, I would cement my place as the rightful leader of Reina Enterprises. The company was now a reflection of my strength and ambition, and I would ensure that it continued to thrive under my guidance. The world had better be ready for the new era of Reina Enterprises, led by none other than Amy Reina. Paul, who was kind while we were dating, started to verbally abuse me along with his daughter, Teresa, after we got married. Despite their treatment, I continued to save for Teresa's college funds. Eventually, a college acceptance letter arrived, and we decided to celebrate, which also coincided with Paul's promotion. When I returned home from shopping, I found garbage bags filled with my books and clothes left in the yard. In the bedroom, Paul, Teresa, and my mother-in-law were throwing my belongings into garbage bags. "Hurry up and leave. We can't invite Grandma over because there's not enough room with you around," Teresa said. "Exactly. We don't need a failure wife. We'll just take the college funds. Thanks." Paul laughed, shaking his shoulders. "A bottom dweller making $10 per hour. Get out, useless mother." "Bye-bye," my mother-in-law added. Something inside me snapped then. "I'll leave," I said. I went to the yard and carried the remaining garbage bags to the car. Sitting in the driver's seat, tears of frustration overflowed. I bit my lip and vowed not to let this be the end. Remember this, I am Kelly, a 53-year-old housewife. 12 years ago, I met Paul, who was 44, through work. We got along well as we worked together. Paul, who was cheerful and bright, seemed dazzling to someone as introverted as me. When he proposed, I was flustered and wondered, am I good enough? During one of our dates, he revealed that he had a 9-year-old daughter, Teresa. I was surprised to learn he was divorced, but soon grew fond of Teresa, who was affectionate and innocent after meeting her nervously. Our modest wedding went smoothly, and our married life started off well. However, the happy days did not last long. I lost my parents to illness during my student days and was raised by my uncle and his wife, who ran a business, after accepting the proposal. I introduced Paul to my uncle and his wife after getting their blessing for our marriage. Next, we visited Paul's parents to greet them. When my mother-in-law learned that I was raised by my uncle and his wife, she seemed clearly displeased. Maybe because of that, she started to make snide remarks to me after we got married. She would come over unexpectedly to nitpick everything. "Kelly, there was a hair in the corner of the stairs. The bathroom mirror is dirty. Don't you clean it every day?" She would frequently scold. "It's outrageous that you work even though you have a small child. These days, everyone works even with small children. I switched to part-time so I could be home when Teresa comes back from school." I gently objected. My mother-in-law glared at me. "How dare you talk back to your mother-in-law, insolent wife?" I never asked why they divorced, but I could guess it might have been because of her nagging. "Come on, Mom. If both of us work, we can save up for Teresa's college funds sooner," Paul said. But as years passed, like his mother, Paul started to verbally abuse me as well. "You come back from work halfway through the day, and this is the meal you prepare. Don't you care to comfort your tired husband?" "I'm sorry, but it's tough to prepare 2 side dishes every day besides the main," I replied. "You just want to slack off. Everyone manages to do it," he said. My mother-in-law, who was a full-time housewife, never used store-bought prepared foods and forbade me from using them as well. So I found time to prepare meals in advance late at night or on weekends when the family was asleep. Just when I thought the issue was resolved, Paul started insisting on bringing lunch from home to save money, which of course I had to prepare, and he found fault with that too. "The lunchbox contains frozen food, and the main dish is leftovers. You're cutting corners too much. Preparing all the small dishes from scratch is hard," I said. "Don't talk back. You're the wife. You know I hate pre-prepared meals. Are you trying to annoy me?" Paul raised his voice. "No more frozen or ready-made meals from now on. But it's the wife's job to think about the family's health and prepare meals. Do you want to make me and Teresa sick?" "You're terrible," he continued. "I'm sorry, I understand. I'll do what you say from now on," I replied. Arguing back would only lead to hours of nagging, so it seemed better to comply quietly. It meant less time for myself, but it couldn't be helped. I had a hobby that brought me joy. After Paul and Teresa went to bed, I would jot down ideas in a notebook, imagining what it would be like if those things existed. This hobby, which I kept secret from them, was a great stress reliever. As a child, I had received an award for a summer vacation research project, and this was a continuation of that interest. Dealing with complaints wasn't limited to my mother-in-law and Paul. Initially, Teresa seemed like an innocent and adorable child, but as she entered upper elementary school, she began to act selfishly. Her mood swings would dictate whether she was affectionate or demanding extra pocket money. Then she would insult me in front of her friends, ignore me, or worse. Being manipulated by Teresa's moods left me exhausted. Seeing Paul mistreat me, Teresa began to mimic him, finding amusement in it. It was a phase of adolescence, and from Teresa's perspective, I was just the woman Dad brought home. Resisting was natural. If she wouldn't warm up to me, I thought I should try harder to get along with her. I made efforts to understand Teresa's feelings without scolding her harshly for misbehavior. Even when she hurled insults, I didn't snap back, but calmly explained, "It's not right to speak to someone older than you like that." I always attended school events and helped with homework after returning from work. Whenever Teresa was sick, I would take her to the hospital and take time off work to care for her. I had no experience in raising children, but I poured love into her because she was the child of the person I loved and raised her with all my effort. However, it seems my feelings didn't reach Teresa. As Teresa entered high school, she needed a lunchbox. Unlike Paul's volume-focused meals, the appearance and variety were important for a high school girl's lunch. I woke up at 6 a.m. every day, making the lunches with care. "Put fried chicken in tomorrow's. I want a hamburger in mine," they would request, making it quite a challenge. Yet they often came back with their lunchboxes untouched. When I asked why, they would say nonchalantly, "I was in the mood for pasta today," or "I passed by a store and suddenly wanted to eat bread." "I woke up at 6 to make these. I wish you would at least try them," I said. Upon hearing this, both quickly became sullen. "You change your mind about things too, don't you? Don't be so sanctimonious. It's annoying. A mother should naturally make lunches for her children." Teresa's hostile tone hurt me more than Paul's words. "Sorry," I said. When I apologized, Paul became even more arrogant. "Don't get cocky just because you made lunch. It's nothing special. You should be grateful we even eat it every day," he said. Their complaints about too many vegetables or the taste being too strong were the last straw. I felt more sadness than anger. Talking with Teresa and Paul always made me feel miserable. The promise of sharing household chores made at the beginning of our marriage was quickly abandoned. "Even if we both work, you're home by the afternoon. That doesn't really count as working. We get home in the evening. It's only natural for the person with the most free time to do the chores," Paul said. "I'm not free at all. By the time I finish cleaning and preparing dinner, the night is over," I explained, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Even on weekends, when I asked if they would help, Paul and Teresa would either lay around with their phones, lying on the sofa, or lock themselves in their rooms playing video games. It was as if I didn't exist in their field of vision. "Hey, old lady, make me some tea," Teresa would say. "I want coffee. Bring it to the living room." "I'm playing games with Teresa," Paul would add. Teresa still refused to call me Mom, sticking with old lady instead. "Could you help me a little after dinner? I have a meeting with the Women's Association." I finally spoke up. Paul clicked his tongue in annoyance. "What? Let us rest at least on the weekend. You see we're playing, right? Do you intend to disturb our parent-child bonding?" "Oh, but you're a stranger, so it can't be helped," he said. The word stranger pierced my heart like a blade. "What's with that face? Got a problem?" Paul threatened. "Who do you think allows you to live in this house? A disposable part-timer like you standing up to me isn't 80 years too early." Faced with their attacks, I bit my lip and swallowed my complaints. Though Paul boasts as a middle manager in a small to medium enterprise, his income isn't impressive. He makes more than I do as a part-timer, but that's about it. Paul's dominance might stem from controlling the finances. Before our marriage, I mentioned I'm not confident in managing finances. "Then I'll handle it that way you can relax," he said. Fooled by his cheerful smile, I agreed to hand over my salary to him. He would allocate funds from our combined incomes for living expenses and Teresa's college fund. Despite his salary increasing over the years, our living expenses somehow decreased. Lately, I've been given only $10,000. Half goes to saving for college fees, and the rest covers food, daily necessities, and miscellaneous expenses. I need at least $5,000 more, and I want some pocket money for myself. Housewives don't need pocket money. Put the $5,000 for Teresa's education into the account first. "I'll check every month," Paul said firmly. I stood my ground. "Paul, you often buy luxury watches and brand-name suits. You nag me about saving money and are stingy with it. You seem to give Teresa a lot of pocket money. Why can't I buy what I want?" I desperately appealed to Paul. "I work too. It's ridiculous to need my husband's permission to buy clothes or go to the hair salon. Both Teresa and I have our social obligations. You don't need to keep up with mommy friends. Dressing up is just a waste of money for you," Paul retorted. Teresa also joined in, looking pleased to participate. Children cost money. Stop complaining. Then I'll increase my working hours. The extra can be my pocket money, right? I suggested. Paul was shocked. That's out of the question. You can't even manage household duties perfectly as it is. What if you neglect them even more? Mom would definitely oppose it, he said, mentioning his mother. I gave up on arguing. It was difficult for someone as timid and inarticulate as me to stand up to the two of them. Yet I harbored a faint hope. Maybe if Teresa gets into college and enjoys campus life, her attitude towards me will soften. Seeing Teresa happily going to college with the money I saved, perhaps Paul would respect me more than before. But my hopes were dashed as easily as they were formed. When the heat of the day began to increase, Teresa's acceptance letter arrived. A few days later, Paul came home with news that made Teresa cheer. "Dad, you're becoming a manager. That's so cool," Teresa exclaimed. "I got the provisional notice, but now it's confirmed. My salary and bonus are going to skyrocket," Paul announced. I listened with a disheartened feeling. I knew not a penny would come my way. I was certain I would still be forced to economize as before. "Yay! Buy me an awesome bag to celebrate," Teresa said. "Of course. Let's invite Mom over tomorrow for a celebration dinner. Kelly, prepare a feast. All homemade, of course," Paul instructed. Watching Paul and Teresa call my mother-in-law, I sighed quietly. This time, it seemed like I might be able to spend some peaceful time without any snide remarks. The next day, I went to the supermarket to buy ingredients for steak and soup. Despite the rainy weather, Teresa and Paul were in high spirits from the morning. When I arrived home and got out of the car, I glanced at the yard and tilted my head in confusion. A garbage bag, open and beaten by the rain, was left out. It wasn't there when we left. A bad feeling washed over me as I approached the garbage bag. I was shocked. Inside the bag were my clothes. I quickly tied it up and entered the house to confront Paul and Teresa, only to find my mother-in-law's shoes at the entrance. Hearing noises from the upstairs bedroom, I rushed up to find Paul, Teresa, and my mother-in-law cheerfully stuffing my books and clothes into garbage bags. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Oh, you're back. As you can see, we're throwing out trash. The old lady's stuff is all cheap," Paul said casually. As they continued their task, I snatched the garbage bag from them. "Stop. Don't do this without asking me." "It's okay. You're no longer needed," Paul replied. The two of them excitedly raised their voices at me, leaving me bewildered. "We've already paid the entrance fee for college, right? And we've saved up the $870,000 for 5 years of tuition. Your role as an ATM is over. Amazing how you saved up with just a $10 per hour wage. It's all thanks to me forcing you to save," Paul said proudly. I stared at Paul, astonished. Why was he speaking as if it were his own achievement? Paul continued, full of pride, "After kicking out the previous wife, I wanted to bring Mom here, but first, we thought of saving up for college. Finding a submissive woman to save up would mean Teresa and I wouldn't need to save. You seem submissive enough and just right to double as a housemaid." "But Dad, you were wrong," Teresa said, puffing out her cheeks. "She couldn't do the housework perfectly, and she lectured me even though she's an outsider. Totally useless." My mother-in-law glared at me in agreement. "We married you, a parentless older woman. You should be more grateful to Paul instead of always complaining." The two surrounded me, saying whatever they wanted. "So hurry up and leave. We can't have Grandma move in with you hogging the rooms." "Exactly. We don't need a failed wife. We'll just take the money," Paul added, pushing the garbage bag toward me. "The bottom dweller earning $10 per hour. Get out, useless mother. Bye-bye." Something inside me snapped. "Then I'll leave," I said. I grabbed my valuables, transferred my clothes and books from the garbage bags to a suitcase, and left the room. Heading to the yard, I also moved the rain-soaked garbage bags to the car. Sitting in the driver's seat, Tears of frustration spilled over. Paul never had any affection for me. To be treated as nothing more than a housekeeper and ATM, how much more could they belittle me? I was furious. Biting my lip, I vowed in my heart not to let this be the end. Remember this, I thought. Eager to escape from those two, I drove a short distance before pulling over to call my uncle without revealing too much. I poured out everything, and my uncle, furious, immediately arranged for an empty room in a singles dormitory for me to use until I found a place to move. I decided to accept his kindness. Fortunately, only my clothes got wet in the rain, so I dried them at a laundromat near the dorm and carried them to my room. As I stored my clothes in the chest of drawers and organized my valuables, I began to feel slightly more at peace. During our relationship, Paul had been truly kind, and I believed I was cherished. Even after his attitude changed post-marriage, I kept telling myself, he's really a kind person. Things will go back to how they were. With Teresa, I thought we just needed time to get along, and with my mother-in-law, I believed it was natural for in-laws to clash. But faced with reality, I finally woke up. No matter how much I tried to make amends or the effort I put in, it was futile with people like them. They would pay for trampling over my feelings. First, I visited my uncle's company to ask for a referral to a good lawyer. I went to the city office to pick up divorce papers and completed various procedures. Eventually, I received a message from Paul stating, "I filed for divorce." After I left, neither Teresa nor my mother-in-law bothered to call, perhaps enjoying their life without me. A month of peaceful days passed until Paul contacted me again. I was working on my computer when I saw his name on my phone screen and decided to ignore it. I had been expecting his call, but I was busy. I let it go to voicemail. Soon, Paul's tearful voice came through. "Kelly, please answer the phone. Something terrible has happened." After the call ended, my phone kept ringing persistently. "Hurry up and come out. Help us. It's going to be bad if it stays like this." He left crying messages on the voicemail and called like a man possessed. Eventually, I gave in and answered the phone. "What do you want, Paul? I'm busy. Can you get to the point?" Paul hesitated on the other end, taken aback by my sharp tone. "Oh, well, I called Teresa's college," he said, sniffling. "They said she has withdrawn her enrollment, so she is not a student there." "What's going on?" "Exactly as they said," I replied matter-of-factly. "I canceled the enrollment. The prep money's gone, but they refunded the tuition fees to my account, which helps a lot." "Withdrawal. Don't make decisions on your own," Paul yelled. "Poor girl, she worked hard to get into college." "Oh, really?" I said, unimpressed. "I didn't know," Kelly mocked. "With the allowance you gave her, she was busy going to nightclubs and rock concerts until morning. Hardly the behavior of a student." That is," Paul stumbled over his words. "I've never seen her study once. So you chose a college where money would do the talking, right? She studied when you weren't looking." "College isn't just about studying. You've taken away her chance to learn other things," Paul argued heatedly. "Oh, my mistake. It could have improved her twisted character, right?" I returned his statement with heavy sarcasm. "Why are you doing this? Do you have a grudge against us?" Paul asked, bewildered. "She told me to get out, called me a useless mother. Who does she think made her college possible? How do you think I felt saving up all that money?" I said. "Holding on to such words, you're petty." "Well, there's money in the account, right?" Paul replied. "Yes," I said, and the call abruptly ended. Sighing, I returned to my work on the computer. Less than an hour later, the phone rang again. Reluctantly answering, I was greeted by a frantic Paul screaming, "Why can't I withdraw the money from your account?" "So you couldn't." I feigned ignorance. Paul started to rant and rave. I was refused at the bank. Of course, I changed the account holder's name. "You can't just do that." "Ah, no. Kelly, where are you?" Paul's voice sounded desperate, almost begging. Without money, Teresa will have trouble enrolling in another college next year. Return Teresa's money. Return it. That $250,000 is my money. I scoffed at the absurdity. If you stop all the lavish shopping you do, you should easily afford your beloved daughter's college fees. Ah, Paul was flustered. I need money because I live at the bottom, so the soon-to-be manager or your beloved mother should take care of it, I said with heavy sarcasm. I'll have a better salary as a manager, but I'm drowning in debt. Mom's on a pension, Paul admitted hesitantly. Drowning in debt. I realized he didn't want his weaknesses known. Both Mom and I are having a tough time, so please at least spare us the compensation, he pleaded. Tough, huh? But I'll be claiming compensation properly later. Take care, I emphasized my point and hung up. The day after being kicked out, I went to the bank and changed the account holder's name, anticipating Paul might try to withdraw money upon learning of the college withdrawal. If Teresa had been serious about her studies, canceling her college enrollment would have been heartbreaking, but given her carefree lifestyle, it wasn't. I chose this route without hesitation. That night, I received a voicemail full of insults from my mother-in-law, which I promptly deleted. Later, through a lawyer introduced by my uncle, I filed for compensation from Paul. Predictably, he resisted. Paul accused, knowing I don't have money, demanding compensation is just cruel. Why should I even have to pay? I provided for Kelly, treated a failed wife kindly, and didn't even cheat. What's there to complain about? Running off with the enrollment money is outrageous. If anything, we should be receiving compensation from you. So I thought I'd wait until Paul changed his tune. A few months later, I received a call from my sobbing mother-in-law. Kelly, please help, she said, her tone as imperious as ever. It seemed her character would never change. Long time no see. What's the matter? I asked leisurely, though I could guess the reason. They're telling us to vacate this house, she said. Well, it can't be helped. It's my house, after all, I replied. My mother-in-law gasped in surprise. Didn't Paul tell you? When I got a job, my aunt and uncle transferred this house to me. I invited Paul and Teresa, who were living in an apartment at the time, to live with me, so it's in my name. This is the first I've heard of it, she sounded dumbfounded. Is that so? Well, anyway, my uncle was furious when he found out I was kicked out and said he'd proceed with selling the house, so I'm going along with it. I'm not kind enough to let the people who kicked me out live there for free. So you're really going to sell it? She asked. Yes, there's a viewing this weekend, so please move out by then, I replied. That's impossible, my mother-in-law shouted. I was kicked out in 15 minutes from my own house, I said calmly. The sale of the house is already decided. It would cause trouble for the real estate agent and the viewers, so please move out soon. Is Paul there? I asked. Paul seemed to have been listening nearby and took the phone. What do you want? He said. I took a deep breath and replied in a low voice. Who do you think allowed you to live in that house? Paul was speechless. Ah, that's a relief. How does it feel to hear those words? Damn it, I'm not paying any compensation. See if you can get it, Paul yelled. I was told to discuss this through a lawyer, I said, exasperated. Paul continued to yell. You with your low salary plan to leech off compensation. Pathetic, but I'm not paying a cent. Are you sure you want to be so confident? I asked. I said this with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. I have plenty of evidence. The abusive words you, Teresa, and your mother hurled at me are recorded and noted. While you forced me to economize, you squandered money on luxury goods. There's no escaping this. A mother saving for her child is natural, and a wife should obey her husband. That's right. If you have something to say, earn more than me, Paul retorted, both making a scene with their vulgar attitudes. Return the college funds, thief. If you really don't, we'll sue you. Suit yourself. Enough, both of you. Teresa tried to calm her mother and Paul over the phone. I'm really angry at her for stealing my important college funds. That's the lowest a parent can get. Teresa, you're right. You're looking forward to college so much. It's heartbreaking. Paul's voice sounded like he was on the verge of tears. But it's okay. There's next year. If Dad becomes a manager, our salary will increase and life will get easier. That's true, Paul shouted with apparent joy. So let's stop begging her. Let's quietly move to an apartment and hand over the house. If Teresa says so, my mother-in-law muttered in a reluctant tone. Be grateful for Teresa's kindness. All right, I'm hanging up now, I said, exasperated, ending the conversation. The next call came the following day while I was having coffee in my uncle's company room. I could easily guess it was about the same matter. Reluctantly, I answered, knowing ignoring them might lead them to show up at the company. What have you done? Paul was sobbing, sniffling, and with a voice like a scream, he asked. My promotion was canceled and I was demoted from manager to regular employee, sent to a subcontracting factory. What's going on? I sighed deeply. It seemed he still didn't understand anything. You know Acme Industries, right? Of course, it's a super famous discount store chain that's expanded overseas. It's also a major client of our company. You've injured its chairman. Huh? Paul sounded dumbfounded. He was actually planning to end the business with your company, but reconsidered out of respect for me so your company wouldn't suffer. You should be thankful you weren't fired. I don't even remember meeting the chairman. The chairman of Acme is my uncle. After a brief silence, Paul screamed in shock. I moved the phone away from my ear to wait it out. You shouldn't have told me sooner. My uncle introduced himself during our marriage meeting, I replied. I was amazed by Paul's lack of attention. He stopped crying and suddenly pleaded, Come on, mediate for me. It's just a little marital spat. If I become a regular employee, my salary will decrease and Teresa won't respect me anymore. No, you brought this upon yourself, I said coldly. Is that all? I'm hanging up. What the hell? Acting all high and mighty when you're just a bottom dweller, he shouted. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Excuse me, President. Oh, I'm sorry, I said. It's fine. I'm about to hang up, I replied, smiling. Ah, I haven't told you. I'm the president of Acme. Huh. The one with annual sales of $700 million. To be precise, the president of the American branch. Paul fell silent. I could almost imagine his shocked expression. That's a bad joke. Weren't you earning $10 per hour just a while ago? The salary slip you found in the bedroom? Look at the date. It's from 12 years ago when I first helped out at my uncle's company, I explained, trying not to laugh. I kept it as a keepsake. The minimum wage has surpassed $14 now. You really are clueless about America's economic situation. Paul, lost for words, soon spat out a resentful remark. Quiet but lucky. You have a rich relative. Even a useless mother can become a president. Do you think the position of president just falls into your lap because you're a niece? I've been developing product ideas for a while. Some of them were approved in Acme's planning meetings and became hit products. I was recognized for those achievements. You were doing all that behind my back, he asked. Do I need your permission for everything? I sighed. I wanted to help my uncle, so I studied business management in college. A few years ago, at his request, I started attending board meetings and management seminars. It's the result of my effort. Paul fell silent again. Teresa's college expenses were covered by the royalties from a patented stationery product I developed. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to manage living expenses and savings for my salary alone. If you have money, then we don't need compensation, my mother-in-law interjected. It seemed Paul had put the phone on speaker so my mother-in-law could listen in. Teresa might be listening too. I learned recently that there's property division upon divorce, right? You're obliged to give half of what you earn to Paul, my mother-in-law said confidently. I couldn't help but laugh. What's so funny, Mother? Property division is not an obligation but a right each spouse has. One can also choose to waive it, I explained. I could almost see my mother-in-law tilting her head in confusion over the phone. I'm refusing it, so not a penny will go to Paul. We can take it to court if you like, but I'm sure I would win. What? Mom becomes the president of Ackman and I get nothing. That's so unfair, I heard Teresa's disappointed voice. Paul remarked, Kelly, being the husband of a president means you can live in luxury. Forget about pride. This isn't the time, my mother-in-law urged Paul. Paul also agrees, right? Mom, Kelly, I apologize for everything. Let's start over. I won't treat you as a housekeeper anymore, Paul pleaded. Mom, I won't call you useless anymore. So come back. I want a high-rise condo for our next home. Faced with their outrageous demands, my laughter turned into disbelief. I can earn well on my own, so I don't need a useless husband. Compensation will be deposited into my account monthly. If you can't pay, your assets will be seized. Take care. Amidst their shouts over the phone, I hung up and blocked Paul, Teresa, and my mother-in-law's contacts. Paul, who had been showing off at the subcontracting company, ended up being fired after causing trouble. Struggling with living expenses, debt, and compensation payments, he now works non-stop at a factory on weekdays and a restaurant on weekends. Of course, they had to move out of the house and now live in a rundown apartment with Teresa and my mother-in-law. Teresa, who planned to enjoy her college life, lost all motivation to study and lazes around at home every day. My mother-in-law, doing no housework, joins Teresa in mocking Paul for his low salary, leading to constant quarrels. Having secretly saved up money, I moved to a luxury high-rise condo and lived a busy life. I was worried about the backlash from other employees for a former regular employee becoming the president, but they welcomed me warmly. My contributions to hit products have played a significant role. Any gaps in my knowledge are covered by the executives. Free from worrying about Paul and Teresa's opinions, I'm glad to live freely. I plan to take care of myself while enriching both my work and personal life. Don't you dare show up at my graduation ceremony. A boring old hag like you will just be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so absolutely do not come. Hearing those words from Kelly made my head spin. It was clear she didn't see me as family. To her, I was just an embarrassment. Hey, old hag, where are you now? The moment I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. She sounded rushed and full of impatience, almost panicked. You can't just leave a silly note like that and think it's okay. Where are you now? Come back home now. I could hear Jake's voice too. Both of them were freaking out. My name is Lisa. I'm a 41-year-old housewife. I've been juggling a part-time job at the local real estate office while raising my daughter Kelly and doing housework for over a decade. I married my husband Jake 13 years ago. Jake had a daughter, Kelly, from his previous wife. I met Jake at my old workplace, a construction company where he was there for business. Our company was tough on clients, but Jake, always smiling and cheerful, made a good impression on me. I recommended his products to my company, wanting to be helpful. As a result, his company was chosen. That connection led us to go out for meals several times, and we got deeply involved. He proposed, and I happily accepted, quitting my job to prepare for the wedding. Just before the wedding, Jake revealed that he was living alone with his 5-year-old daughter. At first, I thought it was a lie. It was hard to believe, but it was true. I met Kelly a week before the ceremony. She was maybe shy, hiding behind Jake, and wouldn't come out in front of me. That's when I decided I would live with them for Kelly's sake. I wanted to raise her into a fine adult. I planned to take care of Kelly properly, especially until she graduated from high school. I'm not sure why I felt this way, but her anxious eyes peeking out from behind Jake were unforgettable. I made up my mind and decided to marry Jake. It was my first marriage, and my family was against it. My father was furious and said, "They're mocking you." But I went against my parents' wishes and married Jake. If I had listened to my parents, I might have avoided the trouble that was about to start. 13 years have passed since that marriage. Kelly has turned 17 and is supposed to graduate from high school this year. It should be a joyful occasion, but I couldn't feel genuinely happy. The thought, I'll make her a fine adult, crossed my mind when I decided to marry Jake. "Hey, old hag, where's my t-shirt? Where did you put it? You didn't steal it, did you?" 3 years after we started living together, Kelly began calling me old hag. At first, she was kind and gradually got used to me, but one day she started calling me old and her attitude became rough. I pulled the t-shirt out from the folded laundry and handed it to Kelly. "Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? It should have been dry cleaned. You know, you're really clueless, seriously so dumb." I had hand washed and air dried the t-shirt because I thought the fabric would get damaged at the cleaners, but I couldn't say that to Kelly. All I could reply was, "I'm sorry." Kelly snatched it from my hand as if she was grabbing it and said, "Really, you're useless," and left with those parting words. Her words were sharp and pierced my heart. I couldn't argue back, so I just apologized. I didn't understand why Kelly had become so rough towards me. At first, I thought she was teased about her father's remarriage, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Around that time, Jake's attitude began to change. He used to smile all the time when he was working, but recently he had stopped showing his smile at home and had become grumpy. He had started calling me hey and you. As Jake's attitude changed, so did Kelly's towards me. I thought there might be something lacking in me, so I made sure not to slack off in household chores and watched over Kelly carefully. I wanted Kelly to grow up to be a respectable adult, but instead, her attitude got worse every day. She called me old hag all the time, and I never heard a thank you from her anymore. It was strange because at parent-teacher conferences, her behavior in class was normal, with no signs of roughness. Jake also talked normally with her and sometimes even smiled. This terrible attitude was only directed at me, which hurt my heart even more. I couldn't talk to Jake about it because he had become distant and completely different from before. I had no one to talk to and felt very alone. Living with a heavy and dark weight on my heart, I was becoming isolated in my own home. Since middle school, Kelly had stopped telling me about school and Jake attended the events. I had to learn about school events from neighbors. Jake and Kelly seemed to get along well, often going out together. I wanted to be treated as family by them too, and had hoped we could live together happily. It was unbearably painful that it wasn't happening, and Jake's attitude was getting worse. "There's dust on the stairs, clean it up. You're a stay-at-home wife, aren't you? We're running out of toilet paper. Are you even cleaning the bathroom? You really are so clumsy." These were the kinds of things Jake frequently said to me. When we first got married, we each had our roles in household chores. Jake used to do housework while living with Kelly. At first, he was happy that we could share the chores. Now, I'm doing all the household chores. Jake once said that it's ridiculous for a stay-at-home wife to do all the housework. Kelly was an easy child to raise, but somehow that made me feel worse. When I tried to discuss it with Jake, he dismissed it with, "You're not trying hard enough." In the end, it seemed like everything was my fault. The more I tried to talk to Jake, the more a heavy fog clouded my heart. He would nitpick my every small mistake in housework relentlessly. "Can't you even clean properly? Haven't you learned anything all these years? Do you lack learning ability?" Jake looked down on me with disdain. All I could do was apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll try my hardest. Please forgive me." Jake sighed heavily, clearly exasperated. "Even if you try your hardest, you won't be able to do it. That's why you get scolded. Always saying you'll do it, but you've never managed it, have you?" His words continued to chip away at my heart. As time passed, my heart grew weary, and Kelly turned 18. I was curious about Kelly's future plans, but she wouldn't tell me, and Jake wouldn't talk to me about it either. By this time, I had stopped talking to Jake and Kelly unless absolutely necessary. I overheard Kelly and Jake discussing her plans after graduation. I wanted to know, so I stopped and listened. It's settled. I got into college on a recommendation, and I even got a scholarship. It's all thanks to you, Dad. Thank you. I could hear Kelly's happy voice. She would never speak to me in such a tone. Good for you. It's the result of your efforts. It was worth pushing all the housework onto the clumsy maid. What an awful thing to say. He must be talking about me. Yeah, it was a good outlet for stress too. I could hear their contemptuous laughter. I quietly left the spot and hid in the bathroom. It was the only place I could be alone. I crouched in the bathroom, held my head and cried. To think that Jake and Kelly thought of me in such a way. I had endured for the past 12 years. No matter how much my spirit was about to break, I kept being Kelly's mother and Jake's wife. Even when I felt I was at my limit, I forced myself to keep going. There were times when I felt I couldn't get up, but I made myself get up, make lunch, prepare breakfast, and do the laundry and cleaning. If I were honest, I would have preferred to just lie down, but doing so would surely make me no longer needed by Jake and Kelly. That fear kept me going. I spent my days exhausted. Honestly, I don't remember much from that time. One day, when I was out shopping, a neighbor shocked me with the news. The next day was Kelly's high school graduation ceremony. I couldn't admit I didn't know, so I just smiled vaguely and left. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I had always thought of making Kelly a respectable adult. Graduation from high school was supposed to be a milestone for that. Again, I was the only one left out in this house. I am not allowed to have a smartphone or use a computer. All communication and information came through Jake and Kelly, and they chose to keep me in the dark. I have a simple flip phone that can only make calls. Jake handles all interactions with the school, so I don't even have anyone I can call a mom friend. I have no way to learn about school information. Still, I found out about sports days and performances from neighbors' conversations and kids' chats on their way back from school, and I secretly attended them. I wanted to properly attend the high school graduation and celebrate her step into adulthood. As I was crying on the sofa, Kelly came back from school. Hey, old hag, what are you slouching around for? It's depressing. You're making the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it? Kelly glared at me. It was her fault, yet she acted like this. If Kelly had told me the date of the graduation ceremony, I wouldn't have felt this way. For the first time, I felt anger slowly rising from the depths of my heart. The graduation ceremony is tomorrow, isn't it? Seems like you didn't tell me. I questioned her with a feeling of blame. Kelly looked slightly taken aback by my defiant words, but exaggeratedly sighed to cover it up. So what? You wouldn't come to the graduation anyway, so why does the date matter to you? I tilted my head in defiance at Kelly's words. I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation. Don't come. If a boring old hag like you shows up, you'll be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so definitely do not come. Kelly's words about being everyone's laughing stock made me dizzy. Clearly, Kelly doesn't think of me as family. To her, I am an embarrassment. I thought this time would be different, but she wouldn't see me any other way. Don't come. Kelly's words pierced my heart. It was clear from her own mouth that I was nothing but a nuisance. That night, Jake came home with a suit and a dry cleaner's bag. He had sent the suit to the dry cleaners himself, without asking me, of course. Jake knew about Kelly's graduation. As I looked at the suit, Jake said with a pitying look and a smirk, "Right, Kelly didn't tell you. Clearly, I am the least needed in this house." Thinking I was family was just my wishful thinking. At that moment, I realized my heart had long reached its limit. That's why I decided to stop being a family. The next day, Jake and Kelly left together for her high school graduation. I was left behind. Moreover, Jake told me, "We'll eat out tonight, so we won't need dinner." I wasn't invited. The old me would have just cried and taken it. But those days ended today. I had decided to leave this house. I made up my mind last night. As soon as they left, I packed my bags, wrote a note, and left the house. I couldn't be a family with Kelly and Jake anymore. I decided to stay at my parents' house, about 3 hours away by train. At my parents' home, I started preparing to cut ties with Jake and Kelly. In the note I left, I wrote that I wanted to end our family relationship and live alone, and that I wished to discuss the details through a lawyer. I hadn't found a lawyer yet, but my father would likely know one. My family owns a lot of land and is known as wealthy landowners in the area. My father also owns considerable real estate and is well known locally. He certainly had lawyers in his circle. I had met a lawyer at a Christmas party when I was at home. Besides finding a lawyer, I had to sell the house where Jake and Kelly were still living. The house was built on land owned by my father, and the construction costs were covered by me as a wedding gift. I had been repaying my father little by little with the money I earned from my part-time job in real estate, which was also introduced by my father. Essentially, the house, both the building and the land, are owned by my father. They are in his name officially. At the time, Jake probably thought the house was a gift since he never asked about the ownership. He was likely too afraid to upset my father and lose the house. Jake is quite the coward. He is aggressively assertive toward those he perceives as beneath him, but to those above him, he is subservient and ingratiating. I explained everything that had happened to my father. As I spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably. I had to stop several times due to my sobbing, but my father listened until the end. There were tears in his eyes too. What comforted me was that my father didn't criticize the decisions I had made back then. In the end, he simply said, "You've had a hard time." Afterwards, my father made calls, and soon lawyers and real estate management people came to the house. Everything happened very quickly after that. It was decided that the house would be demolished, and the demolition was set for 2 weeks later. In the note I left, I wrote, "Please leave within a week." My father sarcastically remarked, "That's quite generous of you." For me, it was just about avoiding later complaints. The week passed as I consulted with the lawyer about the divorce. I also told my mother about the divorce, and we cried together. I can't forget the look on her face, furious, like a demon. I also talked with my father about what would come next. Above all, I needed to set up a new foundation for my life. It took courage to talk to my parents, and it was hard, but once I did, my heart felt lighter, and I slept soundly for the first time in 12 years. A week passed peacefully at my parents' home. Then my cell phone rang. As expected, it was Kelly. Honestly, I didn't want to talk anymore. Remembering how Kelly had treated me all this time, a dark feeling spread through my heart. I decided to ignore the call, but the calls didn't stop. Jake also started calling repeatedly. They were probably calling about the note I left, and maybe the demolition crew had also contacted them. For 12 years, Jake and Kelly had called me old hag and treated me like a servant. The way they treated me was not how family should treat each other. The thought of dealing with them again made my skin crawl, but leaving things as they were wasn't right either. I couldn't move forward without settling the past. If I ran away now and left things unfinished, I wouldn't feel at peace. After the way they treated me, it was time for Jake and Kelly to face the consequences. I braced myself and answered the phone. "Hey, old hag, where are you now?" As soon as I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. Her tone was rushed, full of impatience and panic. "Leaving a ridiculous note like that, you think that's forgivable? Where are you now? Come back right now." I could hear Jake's voice as well. Both of them were in a complete panic. I imagined Kelly coming home from graduation, finding that this servant-like woman who used to relieve their stress was gone. Moreover, there was a note saying divorce and leave the house. Even Kelly would panic in such a situation, especially on the day of her graduation ceremony. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle at how flustered Kelly was. Who is this?" Kelly seemed surprised by my response and stumbled over her words. I hung up the phone. Afterwards, I called the real estate management company to check when the demolition was starting. It was scheduled for tomorrow as planned, and Jake had already been notified. I asked to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow and requested that Jake be informed of the one-day delay. The one-day reprieve was granted. Jake would probably come here then. I was ready to deliver a heavy blow to Jake and Kelly. There were dozens of calls from them, but I ignored them all. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell and knocking. It must be Jake and Kelly. They probably wanted to come earlier, but the poor train connections made it take a long time. Jake and Kelly were panting heavily, looking really anxious. I had arranged for my parents to stay out of sight, so it looked like I was the only one home. I showed Jake and Kelly into the living room. Jake entered the house hesitantly, intimidated by my father, who is a wealthy and well-known figure in town with a commanding presence. Jake probably sees himself as beneath my father. On the other hand, Kelly wasn't intimidated at all. She seemed determined to confront me and take me back. Kelly slumped into a chair in the living room, crossing her legs and arms, silently motioning for me to sit opposite her. I prepared tea slowly and calmly before sitting across from her. Growing impatient, Kelly started to speak. "What the heck is all this about?" Jake, who was sitting next to me, placed the note I had left on the table. I just stared silently into Kelly's eyes without any reaction. Kelly looked away first, trying to shake off the awkwardness with a laugh. "What was with that 'who is this' yesterday? That was some pretty bad acting." Still, I remained silent, staring at Kelly. She became uncomfortable under my gaze, shifted in her seat, and continued talking. "Look, you can't make it on your own without us. You're nothing but trash." I almost reacted to Kelly's harsh words, but managed to restrain myself because I could hear the tremor in her voice. Kelly must be putting on a brave front. So far, Jake had been silent, just watching how things unfolded. "Stop being so stubborn and come back home," Kelly berated me with harsh words, trying to confuse and drag me back home. The more excited Kelly got, the calmer I responded. "I don't have a family, do I?" "Oh, I do have parents, but you two aren't my family, are you?" I said. Kelly, for her part, probably felt out of her depth. She started talking loudly. "What are you talking about? You and Dad are my family, right? Hey Dad, that's right, isn't it?" Kelly must have felt at a disadvantage alone, so she asked Jake for help. Jake looked around nervously and, seeing that no one else was around, seemed relieved and started talking to me. "That's right, you can't live without us, just like Kelly says, so you're coming back." Jake began to act all high and mighty when he saw my parents weren't around. Looking back, I realized what a cowardly man he is. "As I said before, I have no family," I answered firmly. "No matter what Jake and Kelly say, I'll keep treating them as strangers. Jake and Kelly are not my family. If they were, they wouldn't treat me like a slave. Family is about holding hands and helping each other. When someone in the family is in trouble, it's normal for the family to support them. However, Jake and Kelly were different. They've been treating me as a servant and an outlet for stress for over 12 years. Jake and Kelly insist that this is normal. They're unaware of how terrible and wrong it is. They've been oppressing me unconsciously. I'm amazed I've put up with it for 12 years. I'm impressed with myself. It all started when I saw Kelly peeking from behind Jake. I was bound by my own words to raise Kelly into a fine adult. Because of these words, I've been desperately serving Jake and Kelly. That's why I endured until her high school graduation. I had decided that when Kelly graduated from high school and was ready to leave, it would be time to draw the line. I had a faint hope that Jake and Kelly would change their attitude towards me by then, and we could be a family. But they betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided by their attitude the day before the graduation ceremony. So I'm facing them with the appropriate attitude now. Jake and Kelly are no longer my family, which is why I don't treat them as family. Kelly started to change her tone, realizing the seriousness. We are family, aren't we, Mom? Stop putting on this silly act, please. Before I knew it, she had switched from calling me old hag to Mom. Apparently, Kelly began to understand that things wouldn't go as they used to. Jake watched anxiously as he looked at me and Kelly. You may not be my birth mother, but we've lived together all this time, so please listen to my request. Kelly unfolded her crossed arms and clasped her hands in front of her. She had been sitting back, but now she was leaning forward. I have no obligation to listen to requests from someone who isn't family, I continued, keeping my emotions in check. Tears appeared in Kelly's eyes as she pleaded desperately, please listen to me. That note was a lie, right? You're not really going to sell the house, are you? It can't be true because you are part of our family, Mom. I felt disgusted by the way Kelly said Mom. What concerned her was the house, not me. She must be anxious about losing her home. It's true that the house will be gone. Is that what you're worried about? I asked. It seemed all that mattered was having a place to live, even if I wasn't there. No matter how much Kelly begged, my feelings wouldn't change. Kelly hung her head and cried. Jake, upset by Kelly's tears, lashed out at me. What kind of joke is this? Enough with your disrespectful attitude. What's with that note? Come back right now and stop the demolition. I responded with suppressed emotion in my voice. I can't. It's already decided. Do you think you can do this to your family and get away with it? Jake yelled. That's why I keep telling you, you are not my family, I replied, but neither Jake nor Kelly seemed to be listening. Enough already. Haven't I been saying we're not family? I thought, feeling like I was repeating myself. Jake suddenly stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't mess with me. I was shocked but kept my emotions in check. Who's messing around? You haven't treated me as family for 12 years, and now you can't suddenly act like it. That's impossible. My voice came out harsher than I expected. I was angry too, even though I didn't show it. Anger was bubbling up inside me like magma. I couldn't forgive Jake and Kelly's incredibly selfish actions. They trampled on my 12 years of suffering and efforts to become a family with them. They rejected, mocked, and exploited me extensively. I was left out, feeling lonely and in pain. I had wished countless times to be treated as family, but my wish was never fulfilled. It took me 12 years to give up. I continued to strive to build a relationship as Kelly's mother, as family, but it ended like this. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face. Seeing my dry smile, Jake and Kelly stared at me in shock. Jake seemed to lose strength and slumped down into his chair. These two never understood my feelings and tried to exploit me until the very end. I cared for Jake and Kelly, but they never cared for me. No matter how much I cherished them, they never cherished me. And now, when they're in trouble, they try to use me, claiming we're family, something they never believed in. It's too convenient. I feel not just a headache, but even nausea. Why did I put up with these people for 12 years? Looking back, it's strange, but it's pointless now. There's no future for the three of us together anymore. All I can do is make Jake and Kelly acknowledge their guilt and make amends. I no longer expect anything from Kelly or Jake, nor do I trust them. Jake stood up and apologized deeply. I'm sorry, please come back, I'm begging you. No matter how he apologizes, it doesn't resonate with me at all. I won't reach out to help, and I definitely don't think about living together. Enough already. I'm not your family anymore. I'm a stranger to you. Kelly also began to apologize deeply. I'm sorry, please forgive me. We're family, so I want to go back home together. I'm appalled by her selfish way of speaking. After treating me like a stranger for 12 years, now what? Come back because we're family? Did she think I'd be okay with that? That's too naive. No way. It seemed I could no longer keep my composure. Words I would never have said before came out of my mouth. I don't want to hear your excuses. I can't trust any words anymore. I definitely can't think of us as a family ever again. Then I placed a single piece of paper in front of Jake. It was a divorce form. Of course, I had already signed it. Hurry up and sign the divorce form. I'll file it myself. Write it here right now. Jake shook his head vigorously, then showed me a smile. Think it over, okay? I was shocked at how bad Jake was at the end of our life together. He really is a small-minded man. I had always misunderstood Jake's ingratiating smile. The smile he showed when we first met was a sleazy expression of sizing someone up. I mistook it for the smile of a kind person. Thinking about it now still makes me angry. I stood up and called for my parents in the back. My parents then entered the living room. Jake's mouth hung open, as if his jaw had dropped. Father-in-law, he stammered. My father glared sharply at Jake, and my mother also looked stern. Just being glared at made Jake shrink and cower. I'm very sorry. Jake started apologizing deeply and forced Kelly to do the same. I've troubled you because of Lisa's misconduct. I thought I heard wrong. My misconduct? Was Jake still trying to evade responsibility? My father's eyebrow twitched, but he remained silent. Lisa, well, she left home on her own, so I was just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Kelly? Jake urged Kelly to agree with his ridiculous story. Lisa's misconduct. Don't joke with me. My father's loud voice echoed through the house, making the windows rattle. Jake and Kelly gasped quietly. My father stood in front of Jake, meeting his gaze. How can you say Lisa was being selfish? You only think of yourself. You really are a petty man. Then he turned to Kelly. You've done some terrible things too, Kelly. What did you think of Lisa? You did it again. My father's loud voice reverberated throughout the room. Kelly must have been really scared. Her body was trembling. My father stood towering over them with a stern look. Kelly, you've been causing problems at school too. I've looked into it. Using my father's connections, we hired a private investigator, and it turns out Kelly had been extorting money from a girl at school. The victim was too scared to confide in anyone, but my father arranged for her to file a criminal complaint. Kelly, with wide eyes, exclaimed, "She ratted me out, didn't she?" I felt like I had seen Kelly's true nature. She hadn't reflected at all. She was only thinking about getting through this situation. And you, Jake, you've been embezzling money from the company. This too was revealed by the private investigator. Jake had been making fake business trips. I hired the investigator to strengthen my case for divorce, but the investigation uncovered appalling facts about both of them. Why? How could you even? Was it her? Jake reacted just like Kelly, showing no remorse at all. They were so bad at accepting their fate. Neither of them would escape punishment from me. They would face societal sanctions too. Then my mother spoke up. All right, the discussion is over. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house immediately. Jake, sobbing and muttering no, gave up when my father handed him the pen. He sat down and signed the divorce papers. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 8:00 p.m., and the last train was at 8:25 p.m. If they missed it, there would be no trains until tomorrow morning. In this small town, there were no other means of transportation. If they didn't catch the last train, Jake and Kelly would miss the demolition scheduled for tomorrow. They probably hadn't packed their bags, thinking they could persuade me. While I was hesitating whether to tell them, Kelly suddenly said something unbelievable with a sulky attitude. But this divorce was initiated by you, right, Mom? Dad, you should get alimony. Kelly must have been desperate after being exposed. My parents looked shocked. That's impossible. What you two have done is outright domestic abuse and a crime, I said. Kelly, momentarily taken aback, retorted defiantly, show the evidence then. I placed a notebook on the table. This is a diary I've been keeping since we got married. Kelly glared at me with a mocking look. You don't even have a smartphone or computer. What kind of evidence could you possibly have? You seem not to know that a diary can be substantial evidence. It's not just videos, audio, and pictures that count as proof, I explained. Kelly looked dumbfounded. Yes, our lawyer agreed too. This diary is valid evidence. Jake and Kelly finally hung their heads in resignation. I exaggeratedly checked my wristwatch. The last train has already left. I guess you can't get back home tonight. Mother also looked on with a smug face at Jake and Kelly. That's right. There are no taxes around here either. I wonder if there's even a decent hotel nearby. Well, our business here is done. Get out now. Jake and Kelly were rushed out of the house. They probably couldn't believe the last train left so early. I watched them hurrying toward the station from the second-floor balcony. As I watched Jake and Kelly's flustered backs, everything that had been building up inside me began to flow away. There were still some loose ends to tie up, but it felt like it was finally over. Jake and Kelly missed the last train and, unable to catch a taxi, ended up walking for about an hour to a hotel. The next day, when they got to the house, the demolition had progressed, and they managed to salvage only their clothes. Actually, I had temporarily stored the furniture, appliances, and my personal items in a warehouse, but I didn't tell Jake and Kelly. I got a report from the lawyer that the divorce was finalized, including a claim for alimony. Jake was reluctant to pay, but his company was pressured to ensure the payment. According to the private investigator, Jake was fired from his company for embezzlement. Kelly ended up getting involved with the police and was expelled from both college and high school. Jobless, Jake could only afford to lease a small, old apartment far from the station. He lives there with Kelly, who dropped out of high school. Kelly blames everything on Jake, and Jake criticizes Kelly at every opportunity, leading to endless arguments between them, as reported by the private investigator. I was considering what to do next after quitting my part-time job at a real estate agency. Then my father suggested I help with the family business, and I got a job managing his resort real estate company. Living in a resort area is quite different from city life, but being surrounded by nature is a refreshing change. I've also started keeping a dog, so living alone isn't lonely. Right now, this dog is all the family I need. I think I'll just live a relaxed life with my dog from now on.